Hi, my name is Shotaro Tani, Tokyo correspondent for Nikkei Asia. As many of you will have seen or heard by now, a fringe party called Sanseito took Japan's recent upper house election by storm. So, how did a party that was only created 5 years ago on YouTube, spouting conspiracy theories, win so much support? With me to discuss the topic and what this means for Japanese politics going forward is Romeo Marcantuoni, a doctoral candidate at the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Study in Waseda University and a specialist on Japanese opposition politics. Romeo, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Can we just start off by explaining to our listeners and our viewers the history of Sanseito, how they came about, and how did its leader, current leader, Sohei Kamiya, take control of the party?
Well, actually, Sohei Kamiya was one of its founders. Very interesting individual. He's been actually in politics for the last more than 15 years now, starting out in local politics. Then started out trying to create a network of local politicians around Japan that are more in the conservative part of the LDP, we would say, or adjacent to the LDP, but ended up leaving politics to start his own business, which included a YouTube channel where he spread and explained certain topics about Japanese politics, history from a conservative point of view. And then together with other YouTube influencers or other people on YouTube with YouTube channels, build up a party called Sanseito in 2020. And then it was still just a very minor attempt at a party which is not unheard of in Japan. We've seen this a bunch of times. Usually they do not get off the ground, but they stayed at it. They continued to build up. Many of those initial founders left, and Kamiya, as well as the former leader, Matsuda Manabu, are the only ones from the core founding members that are still around. Kamiya became leader after he became the first national lawmaker and died in 2022. Since then, he has been a pretty strong leader in the party. Not that he has full control over the party. There are elections, there are leadership elections, there are primaries, but he has been growing the party ever since, and now has achieved a quite stunning success in this last election.
You called, in your opinion piece for us, Sanseito as a populist, far-right, anti-globalist party. Can you just outline the key features, whether it be from its policies in the latest election or what its party members said on the road during the campaigning or the social media exposure that made you think that this is the right description of Sanseito?
So, interestingly, me and my co-writer, Rob Fahy, we did discussion papers and presentations on this, and we have an upcoming article coming out pretty soon. We have been wondering how to call this party. In the past, we did not focus too much on the far-right aspects. They did start out as a mostly, as a conservative party that is on the right of the LDP, looking towards Abe mostly. And it's also important to note that they were founded at a point in time when Abe was losing his own influence over the party in 2020.
Just so Shinzo Abe's former prime minister, who was obviously assassinated, who was considered to be the right wing of the ruling LDP party.
Yes. And basically, during Corona pandemic measures became politicized. A couple of fringe elements, including Sanseito, began to take on an anti-vaccine message, which also meant that they were using the far-right elements quite much less than they started off with. And they started to actually campaign on anti-vaccine messaging much, much, much more. As Abe lost more power and as Abe then stepped down and eventually was assassinated a few years later, there was a huge vacuum in the far right of the LDP in the political landscape, at the same time as the LDP was kind of diminishing in its influence. But before that, we really were more interested in its conspiratorial elements. That conspiracy worldview is very much in alignment with existing far-right sentiments or existing far-right beliefs in Japan, including about what the war was, I mean the Second World War, of course. What happened with Japan's education after the occupation? Was that an attempt by America to undermine Japanese pride in the nation, for example? That is a big part of their belief system. It's both a conspiracy theory and also a very typical right-wing view.
Yeah, there's a Japanese word called jigakushikan, which basically means self-harm, history view of the world, and that's what right-wing people say the Japanese system, the education system is based on right now, right?
And they've believed this since their inception, but it wasn't that big of a policy point in campaigns, in explicit campaigning until relatively recently. So now we're much more comfortable calling them far right. They use the rhetoric and the ideas of what we know to be the far right in Japan. It's very hard to call it anything else. Are they populists? Well, they see themselves as representing the people, the common sense of the people against a globalist elite, against certain corporate interests, finance capital, Chinese, especially from China, especially sometimes as well from particular institutions that they will name drop once in a while. They will sometimes call out George Soros, Bill Gates, and so on.
The deep state.
We can talk about that in a bit, but that's a very typical populist strategy as well. So far-right populist seems like as good a term to use as any.
The Japanese first slogan that they were advocating for. Do you think that's a right-wing motto? I mean, there were quite a few people on the internet, and I totally understand that internet is a bubble in itself, but quite a few people saying, what's wrong with Japan caring for the Japanese people? Isn't a nation's job to care for its own people?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, especially considering how people in Japan have felt that they have not been really winning out in this global race for economic growth. The fact that stagnation has gone on for so long, the fact that the government does not necessarily seem to have their eyes on the road, so to speak. People must have felt quite frustrated by this debate between should we lower the consumption tax or should we give people cash handouts, which are 20,000 yen is not a huge amount of money. That's probably what most people pay in one of their tax bills in a month or their social security bills in a month. Very helpful for some people, but very frustrating at the same time. And so I think that this idea of Japanese first comes from a place that is understandable. It does not feel as if, for many of these people, it does not feel as if their representatives are representing them. And that is a legitimate feeling. The question is, well, why are they not doing that? And then we get into certain either legitimate criticisms or conspiracy theories. For most people, that Japanese first idea is going to resonate because it reacts to something that is happening in reality. The problem is then, how does this get filled in? Japanese first, what did they mean by that, essentially? You ask supporters, I imagine they will come with specific interpretations that are quite broad, going from there's too many tourists, and the tourists are not doing enough to understand our rules, which is an annoyance at most. It is not a thing to vote in a national election on, usually. But that's a real sentiment, regardless. But then that gets conflated with other issues. Are immigrant laborers, are they suppressing wages? Because wages are suppressed in Japan. Are they suppressing wages, perhaps? That's patently untrue. There's a labor shortage. That does not explain anything. But you would start to think about that, right? And the only party saying these things, sadly conflating them, but saying these things is Sanseito at this moment. Maybe also other parties will, in one or two of their policies, in some of their speeches, perhaps. I think the Democratic Party for the People has also adopted some of the rhetoric in minor ways. But of course, the fact that it says Japanese first, this is not America first, right? It's not Americans first, even in Trump lands, right? It's America first. So it's very interesting to see that they went for Japanese first.
Yeah, what do you think is the difference between America first and Japanese first?
I have a very boring answer for that. I think it's a copyright issue. Not literally a copyright issue, but there is another political party called Nippon Daiichi. So the literal Japan First Party, led at this point still, I suppose, this is something to fact check, Sakurai Makoto.
Ah, right. But they didn't run in the election.
No, he didn't run in this election. As far as I know, he did run in last year's Tokyo gubernatorial election. And in fact, many of the people who voted for him voted for Sanseito in the last Tokyo assembly election. So to an extent, I think it was mostly that. What does that then mean? Well, it's hard to say because Sanseito is very careful about specifying what they mean by that.
The tactic is to remain vague, basically.
The tactic is to remain vague, and they have since then already started to walk it back, saying that we never meant individuals. We never meant individuals from certain countries. What we meant is a global structure of globalism that is eviscerating Japan by forcing the leaders or forcing the economy to give preference to foreigners in some way or another. But the reality at the same time is that, well, what are the specifics they're talking about in the diet, in their policy, in their YouTube videos? It is Chinese capital buying up land, buying up resources, buying up access to water, drinkable water, infrastructure that in some conservative circles, in some circles on the conservative YouTube ecosystem, is described as a silent invasion. On top of that, there are concerns about how easy it is to naturalize, supposedly easy to naturalize into from as a Chinese citizen into a Japanese citizen, by which point you would not necessarily be noticed on the statistics or on certain, your name will not show that you're Chinese, for example, on the paperwork or whatever. Those are also mostly conspiracy theories, of course. I don't think it is that easy to naturalize. I don't think people naturalize for no reason. I don't think people naturalize for these reasons necessarily, right? By obliquely referencing these things, they don't necessarily say it themselves. They will get close to it, but they won't necessarily say it themselves as far as we can see publicly. They have a whole information system behind the scenes. If you're a member, you pay money, you can you pay a subscription or a membership essentially to the party. You get access to certain information, certain news channels that they run. We can see part of that. We can't see the other half of that essentially. And they might be saying much more explicit things there. Actually, they make very clear that part of the benefit of paying money into the party is that you'll get to see the things that we cannot report on YouTube because we will get banned or so on. So there might be much more there. That's definitely the implication. But in any case, what we do know is that the people that they have around them make these claims. Influencers, conservative influencers, people who have been known to be anti-Korean provocateurs, who have their own YouTube channels. They come on the Sanseito YouTube channel, and then they have their own YouTube channel that people can go to, right? And there, those claims, those harder claims, are being made quite directly. So it's very, you can interpret this very, 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 very broadly if you wanted to, and you can look deeper into the ecosystem and find all these explanations that fill in what is meant by Nihonjin first. It's part of the trick. There is the conflation. It is the vagueness.
Having said that, though, there's obviously core Sanseito supporters, but the fact that they won so many seats kind of suggests that there was, a broad support for the party. So, what do you put their meteoric rise down to?
Yes, I think the scale of their rise, the scale of the number of seats that they got, is mostly to be attributed to the fact that they appear as a new party. They
basically a protest vote against the established parties.
To a large degree, that is what I think does help to explain the number of votes. That people are generally annoyed with the establishment, both the establishment media and the establishment parties. And they want to express themselves against that. I think that's absolutely the case. And I think that helps a lot to explain the difference here, rather not the difference, but the suddenness of it all, and especially the scale of it. That's not to say that people don't support the message. I think people, in a general sense, have an idea of what is meant by what they say, but they'll just interpret it maybe more with a little bit more generosity than others, maybe. And some will take it very seriously. Some will be like, okay, they're extreme, but once they have these seats, they'll maybe moderate. And then I'll have a voice in the diet that's actually saying different things still. So I think what the main thing is here is that they chose to take a position that is very different from the establishment parties, which were mostly fighting over basically the same policy, right? It's slightly different. Give money, give cash handouts, or lower the consumption tax. And it was unclear that one was going to win over the other in high numbers. What are we going to have now? I don't actually know, right? With the results that we have now, I don't know if we're going to get cash handouts or if we're going to get consumption tax. The consumption tax will be decreased. I don't even know. And I think voters also knew that maybe not this result would happen, but that it would not necessarily change very much. So while these establishment parties are fighting over these two very, very, very minor differences, suddenly there's a party that has been building up for the last couple of years. This did not come out of nowhere. This is the big mistake, I think, that people are making. Sanseito did not come out of nowhere. They took a lot of time to build up and to get the funds and to figure out a way to organize themselves and to get the candidates and to train the candidates. And now that they had an opening where they could set the agenda after the Tokyo assembly election, they managed to use this Japanese first, this anti-immigration policy to set themselves apart while still looking like a serious party. So it might seem surprising to a lot of people that a party espousing far-right views, which often dabbles into conspiracy theories, got so big so quickly. But I think that these views have already existed in Japan to a lesser or greater degree. They just haven't been really important in politics in the first place. But so the thing that this party did that other parties with right-wing views never managed to do was to show themselves as a serious contender, as something that is someone, as people that are competent, look normal. The party name is just the party of participation, essentially. So
the do-it-yourself party.
Yeah, in English, it's the party of DIY. So it's a combination of these things. There's a combination of the timing, the anti-establishment sentiment, the fact that they were there during this anti-establishment moment, the fact that they worked to get to this point, to be viable by this point. And also the fact that these views probably already existed and that any party with enough legitimacy, with enough resources, could potentially have made electoral gains by appealing to this. The thing is just that most establishment parties would not run on that no matter what, because of norms, because of social norms, because of the fact that parties tend to moderate their views. Even LDP candidates, LDP politicians with right-wing views, we know them, we know they exist.
Well, one of the things, so I was digging through some election data after the votes ended, and there were a couple of things that stood out to me which I thought was interesting. One is that they were able to get quite a lot of young voters, youngish voters, support. When you look at the proportional representation votes, they had the highest support amongst the 30s and 40s and was the second highest among 18, 19 and the 20s. Another thing was that the electoral districts in the western part of Japan, like Hiroshima, Yamaguchi, Fukuoka, Kumamoto, Kagoshima, they in those prefectures, in those districts, Sanseito was actually the most supported opposition party. So, what do you put that down to, the youngish voters' support and the Western Japan support towards Sanseito?
So, in terms of the younger skewing support, I think that's mostly the generational divide that's becoming more clear in Japan. This is becoming much more politicized. This has also a lot to do with where they get their information from. Much more research has to be done on this, but essentially what we can see is that people who vote Sanseito tend to be people who get their information from YouTube or online blogs or Yahoo News. People who vote for establishment parties typically get their information from newspapers and from the television, right? So this has become a very, very clear split.
Mm-hmm.
We think a lot of this has to do with the information environment, essentially, and how that has split generationally. There are questions about economic anxiety being part of the reason. This is also the generation that was hardest hit by the stagnation.
Yeah, the people in the 40s and early 50s, the lost generation, where they had to enter the workforce at a very stagnant time for Japan, basically.
Yeah, and so I'm sure economic anxiety has a lot to do with it, but at the same time, perhaps what that did was mostly push people into distrusting establishment media, distrusting the establishment itself, which then put them into the ecosystem that then made Sanseito look like a good representative of their views, potentially.
And what about the electoral district?
Yeah, that I have much less information on right now. What I do know is that they noticed, especially during the unified local elections, that places like Kyushu are places where they can get a lot of votes, and I think that's where they did get some people into the local assemblies.
Is that because they have a good supporting network there, or
I don't know what the actual I don't know what the inciting incident is. Essentially, what I do know is that Sanseito did identify Kyushu, parts of Kyushu, and perhaps also other parts of Western Tokyo. I can't say specifically which. It's from a few years ago, but during the local assembly elections, they understood that they could do quite a little. They could actually gain a lot of votes there, and they did ultimately, and they got people into the local assemblies. And at least from that point on, once you have that, you can create these local networks. So I'm not sure which came first necessarily. I don't look much at local elections. I can't say with certainty. What I do know is that they did build quite a strong grassroots organization in certain parts of Tokyo, certain parts of Japan, especially in Kyushu and especially Western Japan.
At the end of the day, Romeo, do you think Sanseito will follow through with its nationalist policies, or do you think this was just a convenient tactic in order to gain seats? And the reason I ask is, when Kamiya appeared in the Japanese version of YouTube's political program, and when he was quizzed about what were the priority policies that he was going to put forward in the diet, he said the priority was clawing back COVID-era policies. And I think he was also in the record saying that there aren't necessarily specific privileges towards foreigners, right? So do you think this was all just a clever election tactic, or do you think they are serious about these anti-foreign policies?
Yes. I think it's very interesting to see how he's been mostly moderating after the election. It's very likely that he will not be as explicit on the anti-immigrant sentiments in the near future. But you also see how he is immediately falling back on the conspiracy theories, such as what you just mentioned, this idea of the COVID-19 pandemic having introduced a bunch of policies which are supposedly bad for the nation in some capacity. Or probably he's also talking about vaccination, about the potential for further vaccination if the WHO demands it. This is part of the conspiracy theories that they've been spouting in the last couple of years now. And also the fact that he was immediately after the election talking about how things like the LGBT movement is a cultural Marxist ploy supposed to destroy the nation by introducing ideas that will destroy the family unit. It will not moderate itself into a normal party. It may stop with some of the anti-immigrant sentiment, but it will still be ideologically committed to conspiracy theories because that's what they're saying in public right now.
And last question, perhaps the most important question, what's the lasting impact of Sanseito's rise on Japanese politics going forward? Are we likely to see more right-wing parties pop up?
I think they will probably grow a little bit more. I think that they will influence other parties into taking more right-wing positions. It is up to those parties to decide whether or not they do that. So they have a choice in the matter. They might influence the media to normalize their message, which will maybe then help them gain some more votes. I do not think that they have the capacity, or that in the electoral system that we have in Japan, that they are even able to become like the American GOP, the MAGA right. I don't think that's on the table. This will remain, especially for as long as it's so committed to the conspiracy ideologies that runs through all of its videos, all of its publications. As long as that's the case, I cannot see it becoming a contender for the opposition or even a coalition partner. But it will have an effect. Whether there will be other right-wing parties, there will certainly be parties that will try. The LDP's hold over politics has diminished. New entrants will probably enter. But that could also happen on the left. That could also happen with other types of parties. Sanseito has managed to create a little niche for itself. It can now try to protect. We don't know if that's going to work. We don't know how stable it is, but they've proven themselves to be quite capable of creating a robust organization. And I think we're going to see them capitalize on that in the next couple of years.
Okay. Romeo, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.